Hi, Year 11s. Okay, so obviously the exams are coming up soon. We'll be doing the Easter sessions. However, thought it was important that we had some pre-recorded material for you for those who missed the sessions, but also so you could revise certain ideas over again in your own time at home. So what I wanted to take you today was to look at covering some information here. So what we're going to cover here is ways that this content can be used. We're going to look at the exam papers and the structure of the papers, overview of the course structure, and then also the taxonomy. So what we mean by that is the types of questions that you're going to get and ways that you can structure your answers. So jumping straight into it. So the idea is having this pre-recorded is you can watch it in your own time. Some of us work better in the evenings. I know that when I was at university, I would do some of my best work between 10 p.m. and midnight. Not that I'm suggesting that you should, but ultimately it gives you the freedom of when you can do. You can also rewatch the parts of the content that you have the most trouble with, or also when you're trying to revisit and do practice questions at home, the idea is that it will help you get your answers to be a little bit stronger over time. The repetition can also be really useful for helping learn some of the materials in some cases, but because you've also got this pre-recorded, you can also have this content as a podcast as well as the video, which means, for example, if you want to go for a walk, and you just want to do some revision while you're walking and clearing your mind, you've also got the ability that you can listen to the content as well. I would highly suggest creating your own new summary notes. So obviously you've got your books that you've been working on for the last year and a half, but sometimes creating new notes can help. There's scientific research that helps your brain patterns and things like that for memory recall by rewriting new notes. And then your brain starts to remember things that you wrote down in the original time as well. So each module is going to highlight some of the key topics that we've got here and some of the key terminology. I'm also going to put some sample questions in each of the modules as well, just so that while you're doing these videos, you can do some practices as well. Helps you go through. Sorry. And then I'll also have sample answers at the end of each of the videos, so you can kind of assess to see how close you were. The sample answers are only a guide, because as long as you're able to justify your answers, you will get those marks. So let's move on here. So for the exam papers, we're looking at, so theme 1 is investigating small business and theme 2 is building a business. At this point in time, I've got your at 1 hour and 30 minutes and it's 90 marks. That basically means it's 1 mark per minute. So it is a very tight time constraint. So the faster you can get your answers down, the better chance you're going to be able to get those marks that you need. Sorry, I've merged some of these slides together. So paper 1 is obviously based on theme 1, paper 2 is based on theme 2. They're divided into 3 sections. A, 35 marks, section B is 30 marks, and section C is 25 marks. Now, sections B and C are going to be based on business contexts provided in the paper. And what we mean by that is you're going to receive a case study, and each of those questions will link back to that case study. Questions that you're likely to see are calculations, multiple choice questions, short answer, and extended writing questions as well. So the course structure of what you will have learned over the last 18 months. So 1.1 was enterprise and entrepreneurship. 1.2 was spotting a business opportunity. 1.3 being putting ideas into practice. 1.4 was making the business effective. 1.5 was understanding external influences on business. And that was the end of theme 1. So that is all what paper 1 will cover. And then paper 2, which is covering theme 2, which is looking at building a business. So 2.1 was growing the business. 2.2 was making marketing decisions. 2.3 was making operational decisions, 2.4 is making financial decisions, and 2.5 was making human resource decisions. I know in class at the time that this was being recorded, we haven't finished all of 2.5, but we will work through there. By the time we have finished it in class, I'll also have another revision video for you as well for that. So when we jump into the taxonomy, we're looking at the styles of the questions. So your 1-mark questions will include your multiple choice questions. Keep in mind, some of those might have choose 3 of the correct answers, and then you'd get 3 marks for that question, or choose 2, or which 2 don't fit into X, Y, and Z. So there are some multiple choice questions that will give you multiple options, and you can get multiple marks for that. Now, when you see a give or a define, these appear in paper 2, section C. A give will require you to state a memory recalled fact, so it's like a very short answer. A define appears in paper 2 in section C. It's a short, sharp definition of a term, which is generally only a few words. The one thing that I need to really emphasize here is that your definition needs to be in context. So for example, in the last mock exams, if you didn't provide enough context for your explanation, it isn't considered good enough. So for the example I'm using here is, the question was, what is multinational, or what's the definition of multinational? If you just said more than one country, it's a little bit too vague. So it's really about giving that business context. You know, it's a company who make products and sell in more than one country. So it needs to have that business context as well. Generally, that's also linking to a case study. So start to be thinking in the terms of the case study when giving your definition. But ultimately, it's a 1 marker. You shouldn't be spending much time on this at all. Okay. So more 1 mark questions is identify. So you don't need full sentences. You're going to need to locate a piece of information from a chart, diagram, or graph. So, or generally other quantitative material. So that's basically saying it's asking you to identify information from the bigger case study. Again, short answer. These will often appear in section B and C. A state answer will be linked to a case study and looking at the application. It's only going to appear in B or C. It must be in the context of the business case study or you will not gain the mark. So what that means, it's asking you to state something. If it's too general or if it's not actually linked to the business case, you don't get that mark. But again, it's only a 1 mark question. I wouldn't be stressing over it. So for example, a textbook example of state is state 1 example of a fixed cost. In this case, that clean cuts barbers need to pay 1 mark. The short answer, Josh Smith's salary. That's we know of a fixed cost that they need to pay. Salaries are fixed costs. That would have been there in the case study. So that's the type of thing that you're going to see in a state question. Okay, moving on to 2 mark questions. So this is outline. Outline again only appear in B and C. It's testing your application skills and needs to be linked to the case study. So you're going to need to use a method, impact, benefit, or drawback as directed in the question, but you also need to support it with a linked idea. So give an example from the case study to demonstrate understanding. What I mean by this is that it might be a fairly simple question. So again, in the last mock, the question was around the benefits of having a website. Now, a lot of people talked about in general what the benefits of having a website is, but they didn't go the extra mile to give that extra example. So what I've got here in your textbook example, so is outline 1 reason why being an e-tailer gives ASOS an advantage over Topshop. So the answer is without any high street stores, ASOS will have lower fixed costs. That's your benefit there. That's your first idea. Therefore, ASOS can undercut Topshop's prices. So it's that next. So when we think about the BLTs, it's literally like putting in a T or a B just to follow it up. You make your point and give it that business context as to why. But you will have enough information in your case study that you should be able to draw upon. And that's how you get your 2 marks for that. The other 2 mark question is calculate. So you don't need to get any marks for writing out the formula, but you obviously need to know your formula. They do say to show your workings. Now, if you show your workings, it kind of shows that you understand where the formula needs to go. It doesn't hurt to write out the formula, so remembering the formulas, write your formula. Then it's about finding the right numbers in that case scenario that it's giving you to structure that there for you. So the idea is that you can then work it out if you've got multiple things. So I've seen some students, you know, because you're doing lots of different working out, which is great. For you to be able to get the marks for it, that answer needs to be on the answer line. Otherwise, the examiner, unless you've only written 1 number down and it's wherever on the page there, it's make sure your answers are on the answer line. Otherwise, you're not going to get the marks. If you don't have any workings out, but you've got the correct answer and the answer is on the answer line, you will still get the full marks for it. But in case that your answer is a little bit different, if you've worked it out and you've put the right formula in place, you can still at least get 1 of the 2 marks, and that is worth something. The other thing to be aware of, without fail, every time I'm marking papers, there's always someone who does it. The questions will often say to 2 decimal places. It might say to 1 decimal place, it might say for whatever reason, make sure that you are answering the question exactly the way they've asked for it. So if you've essentially worked everything out right, but you've just rounded it down to no decimal places or whatever, if the question is asked for 2 decimal places, you will lose a mark for that because the answer has asked you for those 2 decimal places. I know I've just spent a lot of time saying that to you, but I'm emphasizing because that is a wasted mark of something that could be really easy to get. All right, I feel like I've drilled that home. All right, moving on. This is where we start to get a bit more technical in our answering. So the 3-mark questions are your explain questions. It's really important as these are the foundations for most of our longer mark answers. We've got in section A, they're contextless. So they are just general information that you know about the content, and it will ask you to explain it out. So explain questions will always ask you to explain an impact, benefit, drawback, or method. Make sure you're addressing the question to get the marks. So for instance, I've seen when some people are asked to explain a method, they're talking about the method, then somewhere in the middle of their answer, they start talking about benefits. You know, they're talking about a method of something, and then they start talking about how customers will like their brand much better. That's not part of the method. So you lose marks for that. So make sure that you're addressing the question. So if it asks for the method, you explain a drawback, you won't get the marks at all. So what we've been teaching you here is BLT. Now, BLT is really important because it helps you extract the ideas that you need from the points that you're making. So your first mark is making a valid point. You then need to support this point with at least 2 ideas that demonstrate the impact of your point, and they need to be linked. This is why I say, don't be talking about these, have these linked ideas and then finish off with, and then they'll have more profit. Because that may, if you're not really talking about profits, that's a really weak therefore. Also, your therefore shouldn't be part of the question. It shouldn't be, you know, what's the advantage of X, Y, and Z? And then your therefore is, therefore, that is why it's an advantage of X, Y, and Z. You won't get marks for that either. We teach BLT because in the longer mark questions, you need to have those 3 linked ideas to your point. In a 3-marker question, realistically, you only need 2, but using the full BLT is a really good way to get your structure there, and it shows to your examiner that you know it well. But if you're struggling in an explain question, you've made a really good point, you've explained 2 impacts. If you can't think of a good therefore to finish it off, move on. Because generally, if you've written it really well, you can still get the 3 marks. If you're not sure about some of your points, you think, it's a little bit weaker, give it the extra therefore, just to try and make sure that you're extracting that last mark. It's not about the quantity of what you write, it is about the quality. You can think of things in shorter, sharper sentences. You can't write in dot points. You don't get marks for that. But if you can have shorter, sharper paragraphs, you'll probably find you'll still be able to extract that. Some people are doing really long answers. You don't need long answers. Just because you've got all the lines there, don't feel the need that you have to fill it up. It is designed because some people have really big handwriting, but there is enough space on the pages that they can have enough space to write their answers. If you write really, really long answers and you run the risk of waffling on too much, the examiners may not see the points that you're making, or they may think that you don't really understand the question. So trying to keep it succinct is a real talent there, and that's something that you should be focusing on as you revise and practicing. Okay, so we've been promoting the BLT, demonstrates a more robust answer. Your examiners, you want to show that your examiners that you know your subject material and can apply your knowledge in a business context. You also want to avoid using the word also, because you don't want to merge any of your ideas, because that essentially is shortening how much. So you'll only get the 1 mark for 1 idea. And the also is the idea that you're extending 1 idea out. Try and have really clear, distinct answers, which is why we say to use the because, leads to, and therefore, because it breaks up your sentence structures. And like I said before, don't fall into generic traps. Saying that, therefore they'll have more profit is a really weak answer if it's not linked to the rest of your answer. There are certain contexts when you are talking about ways that customers can improve profit, you can weave profit into the answer, but make sure you're still giving it a context. So a textbook example here is explain 1 disadvantage to a business of being a sole trader. So a sole trader has unlimited liability. That's 1 point. This is riskier for the owners. That's your impact, being riskier, because if the business fails, the owner's personal assets could be taken to pay off any debts. That's your lead to there. And that's how you get the 3 marks for that. That's 3 lines. It doesn't need to be 2 long. Okay, so 6-mark questions are discuss and analyze. So discuss will be the last question in section A. it won't have an attached case study because it's contactless. It means you're going to need to do 2 BLTs of the benefit. If you do a drawback that isn't part of the question, you won't receive marks, so make sure you answer the question being asked. It is important that you do have some balance in your answers. So don't necessarily talk about the drawbacks as your point, but in your answer, you might be able to consider an opposing view as part of your B, L, or T. Your analyse, it's the same sort of answer, except there will be 2 analyse questions in section B, which will be linked to a case study. So make sure that you're applying your knowledge by extracting the relevant information from the case study. Style of answers are the same. So when you see a 6-mark question, you should always be thinking 2 BLTs. Ultimately, with an analyse, the best thing that I can suggest, just so you don't risk in repeating yourself, is some people do, they try and talk about 2 benefits, but you still need to be showing that balance in your answer. And sometimes you end up repeating some of your points. So you run the risk of losing marks from repetition. With an analyse question, you're better off kind of going 1 benefit, BLT, and 1 drawback, BLT. So a positive and a negative, or a good and a bad, depending which way you want to look at it. There's no reason you can't do it with discuss, but you obviously want to still be focusing. If the question has asked you for benefits, your sentence structure should be 1 benefit is BLT, another benefit is BLT. So remember, there's analyse, you have to be linking to your case studies. Discuss will generally be contextless, but generally it's there in the question of what you need to be linking in there. So another tip of saying you should always have your break in between your answers so your examiner can clearly see your 2 separate points being made. If you're reading other textbooks, there is a way that you can say that they do suggest you can do 6 markers with 1 valid point and 5 linked impacts to follow it up. It's like doing a BLT with 5 points rather than 3. But if you don't make a valid point, you will still lose all 6 marks and you can get lost in your answers, which is why we promote just doing the 2 BLTs for it, because then you're going to, even if you make a mistake with 1 of them, you're still able to get at least half the marks for it if you do it properly. So that's kind of why we still suggest it. You might still get marks if you do that, but what they're really looking for is that structure in the way that you understand that answer. Because remember, your linked ideas need to be expanding on that idea to show your thoroughness of that idea. All right, so here's a textbook example. So discuss the benefit of e-tailing to a business. This is for 6 marks. So 1 advantage is that an e-tailer can sell to a global market. That's the valid point there. This is because they are selling goods on the internet. This may enable them to reach many more customers than if they used physical stores. That's what you lead to. This could lead to increased sales and revenue. So all of those points were linked. I'm always wary of the talking about to increase sales and revenue. This is a textbook example. You'd still get the marks for it. So I'm not saying you should never do it, but it's really important that your examiner can see that linkage between all of those points. So then another advantage is they do not need expensive retail locations. That's the point that's being made. This may lead to lower fixed costs since they do not need to pay to open physical stores. That's your pros. This would mean the total costs may be lower, which would allow them to sell their products for less. That's your therefore. So not everything has to be this huge impact. It's those 3 ideas that follow up from your point there. Your 9-mark questions are a justify. So a lot of people have messed up this structure just because they get all confused. I'm going to try and simplify this for you. If you have your way of doing it, go with what you know. But this is just an idea of what I believe is the easiest way to structure your answer to maximize your points. Because it is a justify question, you are justifying 1 point of your argument. So you don't need to be making your argument for both options. These questions should be broken down into 3 paragraphs. But first you need to decide which option you want to argue. So the question will always talk about 1 option being A, 1 option being B, and ultimately you need to determine which is going to be the best one for your case scenario, and you need to be using your context, which means you need to be using application, which means you need to be backing up your answers with the ideas from the case study. The first thing you need to do You're going to decide which one you're going to argue, whether you're choosing A or B. For paragraph 1, pick a benefit of this option and BLT it. So you might say an advantage of, using the previous mock as an example, like an advantage of sponsorship is, so then you're going to BLT it. So this is make your point, because leads to and you're therefore. These questions, if you're not doing your full 3 expansions on it, you're not going to get the full marks. So you need to do the full BLT. Move on to your next paragraph. Focus on the same option and talk about the drawback to this option. So you're showing balance for this idea. This shows that you're able to recognize the positives and the negatives of your option so you can make a balanced decision. Now, when we get to the next paragraph, this is your conclusion. Make sure that when you're relating it to the context of the business, this is where you can conclude why this option is the best option. I've seen some people argue one option, done the benefit, done the drawback, and then they go into the conclusion and go, the other option's better. But they haven't expanded on why that option is better in the previous paragraphs, so that it completely negates their argument. This is the only at this point do you talk about. So in this case, if we're using the sponsorship example, this is where you say sponsorship is better than targeted marketing campaign. And then you start to go because of why, or it depends on, and you start to give it context, or you talk about the alternatives as to why this is the better option. Because you've argued for and against it already, you still need to be highlighting why it's the better option. So this is when you start to compare it to other things. So it's all linked. So basically your argument is all for the one option all the way through, but you've really just been focusing on one of the two. So I'll give you a textbook example here. So Fred is considering 2 options to reduce the amount he needs to sell to break even. Option 1 is increasing prices by 10%. Option 2 is reducing the cost of ingredients by using a cheaper supplier. Justify which one of these 2 options Fred should choose. Again, this is a textbook example. So Fred should increase average prices by 10%. One reason for this is that Barrett's Bakery produce high quality cakes and pastries, and as a result, he should be able to get away with increasing the average price by 10% without losing customers. This would lead to an increase in receipts and, assuming total costs remain the same, increased profits. Another reason is that by increasing average prices by 10%, the business will be able to break even sooner. This is because fixed costs will be paid off quicker each month, and as a result, Barrett's Bakery will make profit easier. Therefore, the business will be able to invest in other aspects of the business, like the website they are currently redesigning. However, so this is where we go into the drawbacks. There is a danger that increasing prices could impact on Barrett's Bakery sales. This is because there is a lot of local competition from other patisseries and bakeries, and customers may be put off by the price increase and buy from one of the competing businesses instead. As a result, Barrett's Bakery could see a fall in market share and total sales. Thus, despite earning potentially more profit on each item of cake or pastry sold, the overall profit that the business generates could be lower. Therefore, increasing the price by 10% could be counterproductive, as it could take longer for Barrett's Bakery to break even. In conclusion, Barrett's Bakery, so this is your 3rd paragraph now, needs to avoid anything that will impact on the quality of its products. As Barrett's Bakery operates in a competitive market, cheaper ingredients could damage its reputation. Although increasing prices could have a damaging effect on sales, it does depend on the product being sold. As a product such as a donut that might be priced at 50p, but only actually see a rise of 5p. This is such a small percentage of a consumer's income that it is unlikely to result in a fall in sales. The revenues may increase. Therefore, increasing average prices is the only realistic way for Barrett's Bakery to reduce the amount they need to sell to break even. Again, this is a textbook answer, and this is relatively long. You can still do this smaller as long as your argument, because the justify is really about making a solid argument. So you can see in the conclusion, they're still focusing on the one option that they've chosen, and they're talking about all of the extended details around the market of why that is the only option that it should be the case. That is the argument. All right. 12 markers, evaluate. So the way that we've been learning 12 markers here is an option. So the one thing that you must always remember in 12 markers is to include your business knowledge and terminology to apply your understanding and ensure you're answering the question directly using the case study and context provided. Generally, you'll only see one of these. So it's important that the answer is good. So start by defining. So this is what you'll be doing, is defining your question idea, showing that you know this area of the material, focusing on the key words of the question and showing that you understand that material. When we say good or good and bad or bad, we're talking about positives and negatives. We're talking about benefits and drawbacks. We're talking about the idea. When you get an evaluate question, it's a little bit like a 9 marker, but instead of giving you the 2 options, it's generally giving you a statement and you're kind of arguing both sides of that one statement. So this is a skill. You're trying to work out whether overall it is a positive, so it's, to what extent do you agree? So whether you agree with it or disagree with it, and that is what you're arguing for. So your first can be a really short paragraph is your definitions. Then your first area of the argument, you do a good, then you'll do another good or a bad, and then you'll do a bad. So it's either good, good, bad, bad. They're your 3 paragraphs. The idea is that they're still all BLTs. Once you've made them, you then make an alternative, so something else that you consider. This is part of your evaluative skills, showing of how else you can think about the market of what's an alternative solution. You're never going to argue for your alternative solution. You are just going to present an alternative to show that you understand the business context. Then your judgment is whether you agree or you disagree according to the question. So your conclusion will be very much similar to that of the 9 marker, but you've structured your answer very differently. If you find this really complicated, there is another way that you can do it. You may not get the full 12 marks for it, but if you're someone who's been struggling with your 12 markers and maybe only been getting 2 or 3 marks, maybe an alternative structure is better. You might find it easier just to at least get a few more marks, because every mark counts. So the alternative is similar to a justify question. You just want to add the introduction linking the scenario. So that's the same thing, providing a definition, reading the question and showing what part of it that you do understand to make sure that you're able to move forward there. The remaining 3 paragraphs is going to be the same as your 9 mark structure, but instead of having the 2 options, you'll have that statement, whether you agree with it or disagree with it. And again, no matter what structure you choose to use, make sure you're using your business context. You need to be using them there to get the marks. If your answer is too general, you won't get the marks. If you're not showing balance, you won't get all the marks. Following this, you could still get 12 marks, but your points need to be really clear, and that's why you need that really clear structure. So little paragraph is your definition, paragraph 1, whether you agree with it, but essentially your advantages, your benefits, and so forth. Next paragraph, your drawbacks, your disagreement, your disadvantages, and so forth, and then your judgment. You can even put an alternative in there if you want. That's up to you. Here, that's exactly what I was talking about here, the structure here, defining, advantage, disadvantage, and your conclusion. You can keep that as a really simple structure. So here is a textbook example. I'm just going to read through it now, just so you kind of get a bit of a flavour for what it is, but we'll be doing more practices in class. I would strongly advise you to practice doing some of these at home. You don't have to have the same length of this. That doesn't mean you can't get close to the full marks for it, but definitely start to get really comfortable with what structure that you're using and practice. So here, Disney used kid-centric focus groups as part of their market research. Evaluate whether the use of focus groups would be an effective method of conducting market research. You should use the information provided as well as your own knowledge of business. 12 marks. Paragraph 1. The use of focus groups is a valid method for conducting primary market research that Disney choose to use. Focus groups are a group of people brought together to answer questions and discuss a product, brand, topic, or issue. In this instance, Disney specifically target their focus groups at preschool and primary school age children, who they hope will represent a typical sample of one of their target market segments. All right, second paragraph. One of the advantages of conducting focus group research is that Disney can observe firsthand the reactions and comments of the children regarding existing or potential characters, shows, and merchandise. This is beneficial because Disney hope that the response of the focus group is representative of the target market as a whole, and they can therefore use this research to base business decisions on. This means that they should be able to effectively identify customer needs and preferences and be able to satisfy them. This would help Disney capitalize on potential gaps in the market and opportunities that might exist. For example, for new characters and shows, and also reduce business risk by indicating the likelihood of success of an idea. Your advantages, BLT'd in full. Paragraph 3. However, as with all methods of conducting market research, there are some inherent potential disadvantages and risks associated with using focus groups. For example, views of members of the group could be swayed or influenced by more domineering members of the group, which can affect the validity of the data. This could well be true with the age group that Disney are conducting the focus groups, with as many as may not have the maturity or confidence to express their own opinions. Additionally, as Disney is a global brand, unless focus group research is repeated in various international markets, it is quite possible that there will be a localized bias to the responses that may not represent the target market as a whole. Paragraph 4, so this is your conclusion now. In conclusion, caution must be aired when using focus groups. As with any of the other form of market research, if used in isolation, the effectiveness of the method would depend on the likelihood of the views of a small group of children, in one part of America being sufficiently representative of that market segment. This is because Disney is a large multinational brand, and they therefore need to consider the needs of their consumers on a global scale. Therefore, whilst the use of kid-centric focus groups could be a useful and valid method of conducting market research, its overall effectiveness would depend on how it is positioned within their overall market research strategy. That should include a comprehensive range of both primary and secondary research methods. So it's not the same as a justify in that you're arguing for one side or the other. Because you're evaluating, you're asking to look at both sides of the argument and then conclude basically whether you agree or disagree with the statement. And you can provide some context around why one side may not work as well as the other. But the important thing within evaluate is you need to be showing that balance, because that is what you're getting marks for. It is also making sure you're using that business context through and through. So you can still use your knowledge that you know. So you could see in all those paragraphs, there was still a general thing around what the disadvantage was and explaining that disadvantage, but then explaining it in that business context as to why it was working or wasn't working. So that's the important thing to take away from there. All right. So in section A are your non-contextual questions. So you'll start to see a lot more of your multiple choice questions. You'll see some calculate, you'll see some explain, and you'll see some discuss. These are the ones that don't have the case study. So these are generally asking you to recall your knowledge and then answer accordingly. So that's where you've still got a double BLT, but you're BLTing the ideas of that you know, and you can be talking about in hypotheticals. You can also use examples in it if your answer is, or if you read that and go, oh, is it really clear what I'm saying to the examiner? You can then build on that and give an example. If your examiner can see that you understand it and you're unpacking that idea, they can still give you that mark. B and C, contextual questions. So you'll see there'll be one give, one define, state, identify. It's often two outlines, two calculates. Sorry, these are how many marks are allocated for it, not how many you're going to say. My apologies. Obviously, you've got your analyze questions there, your justify, and your evaluate. You generally only see one evaluate. You'll generally have two justifies in your paper. You'll have a few analyze. There's normally 4 or 5 calculate questions from memory. And then you'll obviously see a mix of the others. You can go back and review. So when you learn, so you've got access to all of the slide packs, you can go in detail about how to answer some of these questions and look at some more examples. And you've also got practice questions in those slides. So they're things that you can do if you're looking at trying to revise now. You'll also get practice questions in your revision guides and so forth. You should be doing more than just these revision videos and coming to the revision in the Easter sessions. However, you've got access to this, but doing any revision is better than doing no revision. All of these examples of how to answer these questions, like the taxonomy stuff, you'll find them in your theme 1 because they were done throughout. I think you had some, I think explain and analyze were done. Explain, I think, was done in 1.1. Your analyze and discuss questions, I think, were done in 1.2. I can't remember exactly which lessons. And then as it went on, I think 9 markers were done in 1.4, which was your third topic. And then I think 12 markers were done in 1.3 or 1.5. You can still refer back to this video if you need a little refresh on how to answer these questions. You can also ask me or your teacher or whoever you're able to support you in getting those structures. From here, the webinars are going to really focus on just revising the actual content. So it's going to focus on key terminology, some key ideas that were in each of the topics, and there will be some practice questions in those videos as well. If you've got any other questions, feel free to ask.